Thank you all so much for joining. This is the first in our series of professional development sessions for this academic year. And we are really grateful to our partners with the CUNY Innovative Teaching Academy, or sorry, stumbling on my words already. The CUNY Innovative Teaching Academy, or CETA, who are our great partners here at the central office, supporting this work and helping us really make sure that we're reaching faculty and bringing a lot of perspectives into our PD sessions. And we hope that that many of you will join many of our sessions throughout this semester and into next semester, and we will get started. Today's session is really aimed at trying to establish some basic understanding of what credit for prior learning is as an academic process, some national context around what credit for prior learning is, as well as some national data and also CUNY's own data to sort of point us in the direction of the potential that it has in terms of student success and equity. We'll also cover the basic components of CPL's of our CPL policy here at CUNY, as well as some general sense of best practices and some of the mechanisms associated with CPL. Before we dive into all of that content, I am going to play a short video for us. I hope and I think that we have many faculty in our audience today, and I really can't overstate the importance of faculty and credit for prior learning processes. And we just want to contextualize that a little bit with this video. If you can flag for me right away if you can't hear it. I did test it, but I just want to make sure.
New York City is full of hardworking people whose jobs require technical skills and competencies that are deeply relevant to college-level courses.
For many of these people who haven't completed or attended college, the journey to a degree can feel overwhelming, expensive, and uncertain.
But because we know learning happens everywhere, credit for prior learning at the City University of New York gives eligible students the ability
I'm so sorry.
to earn academic credits for knowledge and skills gained outside the classroom.
National data shows that students receiving CPL credit are more likely to persist and graduate, with even greater benefits for those from underrepresented backgrounds.
CPL helps students meet academic requirements, boost their confidence, and save time and money on their path to earning a degree.
But CPL relies heavily on the involvement of faculty who can verify the integrity and rigor of learning experiences.
It is the faculty who must decide how different types of learning, such as on-the-job training, professional certifications, and specialized skills, align with their department's curriculum.
But here's the thing. Without the leadership and participation of faculty, all of the benefits of access, equity, and opportunity that CPL offers disappear.
Countless potential students possess the knowledge and skills to enrich the college community, and recognizing these abilities can be key in their decision to choose CUNY.
This academic year, begin integrating CPL into your department's strategy for recruiting, welcoming, and supporting the success of students.
Learn more, get involved, and join CUNY in empowering more New Yorkers to achieve their goals.
Okay, so we'll talk about all of that in more detail as we go on today and throughout this academic year.
New York.
Okay, I'm moving right along. So here we have a variety of student scenarios that I want folks to take a minute to just take a look, read these over. I'm going to share a poll within Zoom, and we're hoping that that everybody here can just take a few minutes to reflect on, based on your current understanding of CPL practice and the standards involved, just if you'll be able to check in the poll any of these student scenarios that you think may have relevance and potential with CPL. So take a minute while I figure out how to launch the poll. Go ahead and just read them over. Okay. We're having a lot of results still coming in, so I'm gonna give it another minute here. All right, we have most people have participated at this point. So I am gonna end the poll and I'll share the results quickly. There's really no, are you able to see it? Yes, you're able to see results? Yeah, so, there's no right or wrong answers here, but just I think to take a moment to think about all the different expertise and knowledge and intelligence that students bring to CUNY from different areas of their lives and different aspects of their own lived experience and learning in different settings in their lives. And I'm sure that many of the folks who are joining us today, a lot of you probably sit in roles where you're interfacing with students every single day. And so you know this, I'm sure from your own day-to-day interactions with CUNY students, just how many different ways they come into the university and the types of knowledge that they bring with them. So thinking about that in terms of how it pertains to credit for prior learning, I think will be helpful as we go through today's session. So just to put some definitions in front of us for level setting today. Credit for prior learning, which is sometimes known as prior learning assessment. Oh, am I still sharing the results? I'm sorry if that was in your way. Oh, all right, everyone can see my screen again, I hope. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so credit for prior learning is really an academic process, and it offers students the opportunity to earn academic credit for college level learning that they've acquired in settings outside the traditional college classroom. And the Council on Adult...
I got it. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute folks if I hear some interference, so apologies. The Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, known as CALE, they take this definition a step further to describe CPL as a set of methods for assessing this learning. And the processes around CPL are really based on the recognition that the outcome of learning is more important than how that learning happens, and that people can learn the same things in a variety of different ways. And we're going to refer to CALE a lot throughout today's session. They're a really important national partner in this work. I think thinking about what assessment means and thinking about it as the appraisal of knowledge and skills and attitudes and beliefs that students have acquired. And then thinking about what college level learning, like what do we mean by college level? And CALE offers this comparison where you can sort of start to see the distinction between types of learning that move beyond general knowledge, that combine theory and practice, that have a complexity of breadth and depth of that knowledge, and also that is pertinent to existing college curricula. So those are sort of how we think about what college level learning means.
You're okay.
So, oops, these.
You're muted.
Okay, am I unmuted now? I'm so sorry. Good, okay. Okay, so these are some definitions of the various CPL mechanisms, and these come from a national report, and we're going to talk in more detail about all of these as we get into CUNY's policy. But just to give you a sense of the fact that that there really is some pretty consistent use of these forms of CPL across the country, and that we're talking about standardized exams that are used nationally, as well as evaluation of non-college programs. We'll get into more detail about what that refers to, as well as non-credit to credit articulation and forms of individualized assessment, such as portfolio, and also exams that are developed by faculty at the academic department level. So more to come on all of that momentarily. The next couple slides, I wanted to share sort of a timeline of the history of credit for prior learning. CUNY has had a policy in place since 2020, but the the context for what it means to recognize learning outside of a college classroom actually really dates back many decades, and really, points back to after World War II, with the introduction of credit for military experience in response to veterans coming home from World War II. That was sort of some of the first instances of credit for prior learning that we saw in this country. And then throughout the 60s and 70s, there was a real rise in adult learners as becoming part of the higher ed landscape. And this was around the time that CALE first launched, and that there began to be research and scholarly interest in how to prepare a new workforce and recognize the knowledge of working adults. It also was a time where there was, different national movements to bring different populations into college and to create more equity and access. And then moving into more recent times, throughout the 90s and early 2000s, CALE put out a huge amount of research and different publications that really shaped a national conversation about recognizing learning and best practices for supporting adult learner populations. And then in the past decade or so, we've really started to see a lot more national data about the impact that credit for prior learning can have for students in terms of equity and access, and also student success measures. This all really shaped a new interest and a different era of institutions becoming involved and interested in scaling this up for students. And I would say that includes CUNY. When our policy was adopted in 2020, I think it really grew out of an interest and a lot of work that was happening across the university to understand how we could become more welcoming and friendly to adult learners. I think it's interesting and important also to note that in 2022, CALE actually changed their terminology. Previously, CPL was referred to as PLA, or prior learning assessment. But in 2022, CALE made an announcement that they were going to change their terminology. And that really had to do, there were a couple, oops, sorry, hold on, move that. Sorry, some things are popping up on my screen. Thank you for your patience. So they pointed to the fact that they see the credit for prior learning terminology as being more inclusive of some of the methods that are really taking shape that are less individualized. They also wanted to move away from the word assessment, which can have different meanings in higher education, and also they found from surveying students that that credit for prior learning meant something that was more tangible and understandable to student populations. So just sort of an interesting fact, but you will see, in various materials that that PLA is still used here and there. So just something that you'll know more about now. I also just wanted to share this timeline of CPL related headlines from articles that appeared in Inside Higher Ed over the last 15 years or so. This will be, of course, as I mentioned, we'll be sharing this slide deck, and these linked articles are a really interesting reflection, I think, on just sort of the shape of the CPL conversation and the way that it's evolved over time, and also how it has picked up steam in the last 5 to 10 years in ways that have shaped what it means at CUNY and across the country. Now, just to give a little bit more context about the national landscape, there are almost 37 million adults in this country that have some college credits, but they stopped out without earning a college degree. I'm told that this represents 1 in 6 adults. This is a huge population that's not benefiting from access to higher ed in terms of career opportunities and earning potential. For institutions, this also represents a really important recruitment opportunity. At the same time, though, over 80% of institutions across the United States offer some form of CPL. So this is to say that the concept and practice of CPL is very widespread, and most institutions recognize the purpose and value that it holds for students, and particularly as a way that it can help address issues of equity and access for these adult learners that have some college and no degree, and other adults that haven't necessarily had access to higher ed. This is certainly true at CUNY as well. I'm sure that across many, I know that across many of our colleges, CPL has been in place in different forms and maybe under different names for a very long time. We have a policy that's relatively new, but in a lot of cases, the practices, have deep roots in history. And CPL is quite homegrown and widespread in a lot of different contexts. And I think that this is really important because as all of you have come here today to learn more about this and to think more about this concretely, I think part of it is just recognizing that we know the benefit that it holds for students, and we want to make sure that we're doing this according to current best practices, and that we're really thinking about the students that we're trying to reach. This is particularly important right now at CUNY in light of initiatives like CUNY Reconnect and the New York State Opportunity Promise. We are really working closely with the city and the state on these initiatives to make sure that we are doing what we can to support pathways into CUNY colleges, especially for working adults. And this really puts, I think, the lens of CPL in a different context for all of us, and hopefully we'll be able to work together to create a lot more opportunities than currently exist. And I think to understand how CPL can be a part of sort of the larger idea of an adult learner support infrastructure that CUNY is striving for and that is really necessary in this country right now, we can take a closer look at the PLA Boost report from CALE. So this came out in 2020, so you'll see the reference to PLA, which I mentioned that they've made that shift. But the main takeaways from this report are that CPL increases completion and persistence rates. So this study looked at hundreds of students from hundreds of institutions all across the United States, looking at the outcomes for students who received CPL credit compared with students who did not receive CPL credit. And it increases the chance of students completing their degree by more than 17%. Students who earn CPL tend to take more credits because they stay in college longer and they continue taking more courses. It can also save them thousands of dollars, and it can accelerate their path to degree completion. CALE's report also shows that CPL has this really important function as an equity lever. Students who receive CPL have higher completion rates, and the impact on graduation rates are even more pronounced among underrepresented student populations. And then on the other side of that, though, only 1 in 10 students have actually used CPL, according to CALE's report. And the participation rates among women and Pell Grant recipients and Black students is even lower than that 1 in 10 students. So this really points to the fact that students have a huge opportunity to benefit from CPL, to improve their completion rates and to have all that cost savings and time savings in getting their degrees. But without full implementation and scale of access to CPL, the full benefits really cannot be realized. And implementation at scale can mean a lot of different things. How do students learn about opportunities that are available at their college, and what kind of perceptions do faculty have about the way that CPL can support their students and impact their institution? CPL also, we'll talk more about this, CPL touches many different administrative departments across any institution. So this is really it's an opportunity, and it's it has the potential to really impact students, but many different college level systems need to be pulling in the same direction in order for it to really reach across and support all students the way it could. And this national picture that I'm describing is even more interesting, I think, when we think about CUNY's population. The diversity of our student population compared against CALE's study, which includes much smaller percentages of these underrepresented student groups. But if you think about how CPL benefits can be even more pronounced for certain student groups, and how these groups account for larger percentages of CUNY's student population, the potential here is really significant and makes our work very important to the overall mission of CUNY in terms of making sure that students have access to education and that they do so equitably across the board, and that we're delivering on our promise of excellence and affordability and all of the things that we all really value about CUNY. I'll pause there for a moment before I dive into CUNY's policy to see if we have any questions. I'm gonna try to take a look at the chat. Okay, let's see. Okay, do we know much about the impact of CPL acceptance? Has it kept more students in schools or brought them back? Are immigrant students eligible for CPL work based on work experience for their home country? These are great questions. So in response to what we know about the impact in terms of it bringing them back to school, Daniel, you mean in terms of data?
Yeah.
Oops, I see that there's some people in the waiting room. Ted, are you able to let those folks in? Somebody's messaging me about that. Okay, I think the question here, you're asking about, like, do we have data to show that this is actually bringing more students into the university? I think we're starting to understand more about our data. I'll get into a lot more detail about this later in the session. I think we know from national data that it does attract students to the institution, and it does, they typically, their persistence and completion sees upticks from having earned CPL credits. Whether we have the data across CUNY to show that at this time, I think we're still working toward really, I think there are some CUNY colleges that have been tracking and sort of promoting their CPL work for longer, who are able to actually clearly make those claims from their data, but we're working toward that. And I'll say more about the data in a little bit. Are immigrant students eligible for CPL based on work experience from their home country? Yes, you know, any form of work experience or learning, we'll get into a lot more detail about this, but where there is willingness on the part of faculty to evaluate different forms of learning and make different kinds of opportunities available, where it can be demonstrated that learning and experience, or the learning acquired through experience, rises to that college level threshold. Absolutely, immigrants are an important population for us to think about. Okay, I'm seeing questions about faculty and the role that they can play. We will get into that for sure. And nursing, we can come back to that in a little bit as well. I'm going to say a little bit more about our policy and practice, which may answer some of these questions. We can flag these for a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so CUNY's policy, which is available in full on our website. So I've pulled out a few points from the policy, and I've included on the left-hand side here. This is like the policy lingo, and then on the right-hand side, I've tried to boil it down to just be really clear about what our policy says on these really important points. The first one is that it is faculty who determine alignment of learning and decide appropriate equivalencies and credit awards. So this is decided at CUNY at the academic department level. Faculty are our subject matter experts and our curricular experts, and they are the ones that really decide whether or not a given learning experience or an individual learning rises to the level of college level and how that articulates to a particular course or program. Faculty are incredibly important in this way, so more on that soon. CPL credit can be awarded for a few different types of credit. For major courses, it can fulfill gen ed requirements, and it can also be awarded as departmental electives. One thing that I will say that our policy is quite clear about is that general elective credit should be a last resort. We want to try wherever possible to award credit that is meaningful to students and that will help them make progress toward degree completion. CUNY's policy is also quite specific that CPL credits do not fulfill residency requirements. And also when students transfer from one CUNY college to another, CPL credits are not subject to reevaluation by the receiving college. And this is a really important point. So I'm going to pause on this for a moment just to make sure folks understand that, that when a student is awarded CPL credit at one CUNY college and they transfer to another CUNY college, that credit transfers as though the student took the course at the original college. And I think that, you know, that's a good segue into just some comparison of how CPL is similar to transfer in terms of process. And I think that, you know, many faculty and many administrators as well have a lot more familiarity and comfort with transfer processes, but it is essentially, it's a form of CPL, and it can be helpful to think about it working according to a similar process in that it relies on faculty's curricular expertise, and that, like I said before, credit can be awarded for major courses, gen ed requirements, or electives, and that at an institutional level, it's really critical that CPL equivalencies are configured in CUNY first, that rules are written so that after learning is evaluated and a determination is made, that the next student who comes along with that particular form of learning, whether it's an exam or an industry certification, that they would receive the same credit. And I just check, see if we have any. Must faculty assessors be the department chair and an appointed department faculty member? That's really a question, I think, at an academic department level. I think that in some departments, they do designate sort of a specific person who is responsible for reviewing CPL possibilities, and in other departments, they work on it more collaboratively together. It does not have to be any particular person. It is really at the discretion of the department to decide how that works. Another question here, is it okay if we add an exam to verify that they have college level knowledge, especially for CPL for some courses? So we can talk more about that. So if, well, actually, we will talk about it right now because I'm going to move over to our next slide here. So, so these are the mechanisms as they exist within CUNY's policy. And so if the question here is about standardized exams, so the 6 standardized exams that are named in CUNY's policy, which are on screen right here, for these 6 programs, the policy specifies threshold scores that qualify for CPL. So if a student presents a qualifying score on any of these 6 exam programs, the college has to award credit, and what that credit award is up to the department. But it would not be appropriate for a department to insist on a student taking another like local exam on top of the score of the exam that they have. The exam score that they have earned in this, because CUNY's policy is to award credit based on these exam scores. Adding an exam to verify the college level knowledge, there may be instances where that's appropriate, and we can talk more about that as we continue here, if that's okay. So we had started out here, and I'm just so that we have the context, like the 4 mechanisms that we're gonna talk about are standardized exams, which we just discussed, and then non-collegiate learning, which is like industry credentials and professional licenses, continuing ed, military training, other like organized learning experiences. And then we're also going to talk about challenge exams, which I think gets at that question that was raised in the chat, and then portfolio assessment or individualized assessment. So we talked about standardized exams, and now we'll talk a little bit about non-collegiate learning. So for these forms of learning, you know, their colleges have, the policy does not mandate that colleges must award credit for this type of learning. However, it's encouraged, and we also do point to some specific resources that faculty can use to evaluate these types of learning. 2 national resources that the policy points to specifically are the American Council on Education's National Guide. So this is a database of credit recommendations that are based on evaluations that are conducted by faculty from colleges and universities all over the country. If you search in that database, you can find many different kinds of credentials and training programs that have been evaluated according to ACE's process and the credit recommendations. And also the NCCRS directory is a similar resource. And both of these can provide information that faculty can base their evaluation on. So colleges don't have to award credit based on the way that it's recommended by these organizations, but it can be a really good resource for understanding nationally how a particular learning experience is understood. We also have a great resource in CUNY's Transfer Explorer. I'm not sure how many folks here are familiar with the non-CUNY courses, trainings, and exams search function. I'll say more about that in a couple of minutes. But that is one tool for seeing how other CUNY colleges are already awarding credit for different forms of non-collegiate learning, which can be very helpful. More on that in a moment. I will skip over to say, I'll come back to the CPL recommendations from the multi-campus evaluation in just a moment. But first I'll say that faculty can also use materials directly from these credentialing organizations that run these programs and certify these different licenses and trainings. You can use the actual materials and objectives and competencies that those organizations specify, and you can crosswalk those against the learning outcomes of a particular course. And we have some tools that our department has created to help faculty with that crosswalking process. There are also some national resources to help standardize and guide the process of that kind of crosswalking and evaluation, such as some standards from the Consortium for the Assessment of College Equivalency, or CASE. And there's also professional evaluation. There's a professional evaluation process which can guide that that conversation for faculty. Ted, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, there were two questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to answer that now or.
Thank you. Thank you. Sure, I will. Okay. Here we go. Why doesn't CUNY mandate the same policies for all 4 approaches, not just the exams? So I think that CUNY's policy to mandate for exams is, standardized exams are more straightforward in the way that they are aligned with college level learning. There are sort of built-in standards and nationally recognized norms that we can base that on. And for non-collegiate learning, I would say that there's so many different, it takes so many different shapes and so many different forms that I think that in the development of the CUNY policy, it recognized that that CUNY colleges really needed to be to have their that certain level of autonomy in allowing faculty to make the determination about how different forms of non-collegiate learning aligned with curriculum. And for portfolio and challenge exam, I'll get into more of that shortly. I hope that's sufficient for the moment, but it's a great question. Okay, if a student earned an associate degree and transferred to a senior college, can they request CPL credits if they qualify for it, even transferring 90 credits from a senior college? Okay, so yes, okay, so this is an important point. So I think that sometimes the concept of prior learning can be confusing or misleading in that students are eligible to request and be considered for credit for prior learning at any point in their academic journey. So it doesn't have to be learning that occurred before they started college or before they returned to college. It can be something that, they could be in a job throughout their college career and earn some type of certification that could be eligible while they're in school, and they'd be eligible to request credit or consideration of that learning at any point, and that includes upon transfer. I think the important thing about the distinction between the number of credits that they're transferring versus CPL credits is that CPL credits can't count toward residency requirements. So if the credits that they're transferring so it's basically like the pool of credits that is outside of those residency requirements would include both transfer and CPL. But that doesn't preclude a student from being eligible for CPL if they have room within that pool of credits, if that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. I can clarify more if needed, but okay. I'm gonna move to our next slide. So I had mentioned in the previous slide that one other resource that's available for departments in considering non-collegiate learning are recommendations that have been developed by committees of faculty from multiple colleges. So we work to identify certain types of learning experiences or industry recognized credentials that have significant populations of prospective students attached to them. So people in the workplace, or in the case of the New York State Seal of Biliteracy, students who are coming to CUNY from New York City public high schools who have earned this state recognized credential. And so for these, for a number of different credentials, we have gone through these evaluation processes, bringing together usually equal numbers of faculty from community and four-year colleges. And they do a very in-depth review of the credential material, and they come up with a recommendation that is then shared from our office. And we ask all colleges to consider those recommendations. And these are not mandates, but we do hope that relevant departments will consider them, because there is great opportunity to serve more students by creating that consistency across the university. This year, we are working to convene additional committees. We will be convening some in computer science, looking at some relevant credentials in that space, including those pertaining to programming languages. And we'll also be looking at some health-related military occupational specialties in hopes of creating more consistent ways for people coming in from that background to articulate into, or to bring credits into relevant programs. So more information coming on that soon. And if there's anybody here who that piques your interest as a faculty member and potentially serving on one of those committees, you know, keep your eyes open. More information coming soon. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions right now. Okay. Oh yes, I think Enola, that's a great point, that CPL should be especially important and beneficial for students with disabilities. Absolutely. And I'd love to talk more about that outside of today's presentation, to think together with folks who are interested in that particular angle. Thank you for raising that. Okay. Oh, and I think the other reason that I want to make sure that folks are aware of these recommendations is that you may find that students are asking about these, because the word of mouth can be a powerful thing, and there are some colleges that are awarding credit for them, and you'll want to make sure that you're aware of that if any of these fall within your department, or for those of you that are representing like CPL teams, offices that are, you know, figuring out sort of how to engage faculty. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you have not seen these recommendations in your role, I would be happy to point you in the right direction for those. Okay, let me see if we have another question. Is there space for CPL items on the standard CUNY transfer application? I would say no, there is not. At this time, there is not any there's not really any mechanism on the CUNY application or the transfer application for specifying potential CPL eligibility. I think that is a really interesting and important question for us to consider, though. Okay, I want to be mindful of everyone's time and make sure we're getting through everything here and getting to questions. Thank you all so much for such great questions. I hope that that this is, you know, bringing some good points up. I really appreciate it. Okay, so I want to take a moment to talk about Transfer Explorer. And so for those of you, I'm sure many people here are quite familiar with Transfer Explorer for the purpose of understanding how courses at CUNY transfer to other CUNY colleges. Maybe there's fewer people who are familiar with the non-CUNY search function. So I've highlighted it here so you can kind of see where it falls on the TUREX homepage. And then I've provided an example, which I think actually, now that I see it, I probably need to update this example because I think that Lehman does now have an equivalency in place for CompTIA A+. So I should update that. But the concept here is that you can use this search function to look for particular industry credentials or training programs and understand which CUNY colleges are awarding credit for these and which CUNY colleges are not awarding credit for them and the specific courses that are being awarded in that case. And this is really useful for a few reasons. First of all, it makes this information publicly available. It makes it possible for prospective students or employers or various student-facing roles within a college, such as advisors or faculty, to understand the available CPL opportunities across the university. And then there's sort of an added layer of use where once you see that at BMCC, a student can receive CIS 165 for CompTIA A+. You can then go back to sort of the more usual function of TREX to see how that particular course already transfers to another CUNY college. And that can be a really good opening point of discussion and consideration within academic departments to understand sort of the basis of comparison, like a course that they may want to look at for the purpose of crosswalking with a particular certification. So those are some, and there's a great video in the Help Center on Transfer Explorer that explains this function in some great detail. So more on that. But for now, I'm going to move quickly to the last two forms of CPL, and then we'll get into a few other quick things. There's a lot to cover here, obviously. Do we have any questions? No questions in the chat. I'm going to keep moving. Okay. So the other CPL mechanisms to be aware of, so portfolio assessment and challenge exam are both named in CUNY's policy. At this time, these are generally not as widely available across CUNY as non-collegiate learning and standardized exams. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of them have to do with just the nature. I mean, frankly, and I'll explain more about this as well. But these are harder to implement. These are harder to design in ways that are manageable and sustainable, and that fit within departments. But I know that there is a ton of interest in these mechanisms across CUNY. So I'll talk more in a minute about ways that we're going to try and support that more going forward. But for portfolio assessment, those that may not be familiar with it. So this is a process by which students basically they can develop a portfolio that includes narrative content and evidence that shows how their own individual learning aligns with the specific learning outcomes of a particular course. And then that portfolio is evaluated by faculty to determine whether or not it meets those learning outcomes in such a way that warrants academic credit. And there's a few different ways that that colleges can opt to approach portfolio assessment. An academic department can sort of look at a particular course and say, this would be a good fit for portfolio, and we're going to design an opportunity that fits right here. Or it could be a little bit more at an institutional level, making it available in ways that could span multiple departments or all departments. So we can talk more about that, but just to give a sense that there's different ways that it can be approached. And other forms of individualized assessment, like a skills demonstration, those are also, our policy refers to portfolio assessment, but I think that faculty can be creative and expansive about thinking about the model of portfolio that would make sense in their discipline. Thinking about like digital content and, a lot of different possibilities there. Then challenge exams. So academic departments could choose to develop an exam for a specific course in order to create a pathway for somebody with a strong relevant background, but who doesn't necessarily have like a specific credential, or there isn't really an aligned exam available. This could be a way of creating a CPL opportunity that would target a population like that. So on both fronts, across portfolio assessment and challenge exams, we have some upcoming opportunities for folks at the campuses to get involved and to hopefully inform some of the way that this is happening both locally on your campus and at a system level. So one plan that information is going to be coming very soon about is that we're planning to convene an open invitation portfolio working group this year. And we're going to hold sessions to explore topics about like administrative structures that are necessary for portfolio, types of courses that should or could be eligible for portfolio, the type of professional development that would benefit faculty as either designers of portfolio opportunities or evaluators of portfolios. We want to think about the type of guidance that students need, and as well as templates and tools that departments need to appropriately design, implement, and assess portfolios. We'll also be looking at different expenses associated with portfolio assessment as well as cost structures. We would really benefit from the participation of many different stakeholders. So when this information comes out, we hope that many of you will consider getting involved. Our goal is really to shape policy guidance and help us make process and practice recommendations, and also to develop concrete tools to support campus level implementation of portfolio. At the same time, we are hoping to offer 2 rounds of our, maybe some of you have participated in past years. We've worked with CALE to offer their Assessing Prior Learning workshop. We're hoping to offer one later this fall and definitely in the spring. And this is an opportunity for faculty to get a much more in-depth sort of overview of how portfolio and challenge exams can work and to have some guidance towards starting to create those kinds of opportunities within your own department. So stay tuned for more information on both of those. At this point, I'm going to bring us back to this survey, and I'm going to launch it again for just a moment and give everybody a chance. I don't know if people's thinking has changed about, let me see if I can relaunch the poll. Yeah. I'm going to relaunch the poll. I don't know if anything we've talked about here has reshaped the way that anybody is thinking about this, but just to bring us back to what this is really about, which is the incredible students and people of New York who aren't currently utilizing CUNY for what it's here for, and how we may be able to look more closely at their background and their experiences and their knowledge, and think about ways that we can serve them that are, beyond and different from the traditional, the traditional model of higher education, and roping in these concepts of credit for prior learning. So I'll let folks take just a minute, and while you're doing that, I'm going to take a look and see what questions we have in the chat. We have about 10 more minutes in the session, so I want to make sure that we get as many questions. Here we go. I'm going to move. All right. Okay. Question here about the adult degree program at Lehman. So, okay. So my understanding of the adult degree program is that I believe that that's one of the only places at Lehman that has a portfolio option. But I know that Lehman has a lot of other forms of CPL available. They've done a lot of evaluation of different kinds of non-collegiate learning. So there's certainly more CPL available at Lehman than just within the adult degree program. I know that Lehman has also done some really interesting and innovative work around CPL as a completion strategy. So trying to find opportunities to connect students with credit opportunities when they just have like a gap of a few credits between where they're at and finishing their degree. So we can actually, I hope at some point this year, we'll be able to learn more from Lehman in one of these sessions. So can individual departments develop their own portfolio assessment, or does it have to be in line with the CPL office or of that college? I would say that individual departments, they can develop their own portfolio assessment models. I would encourage you to do it in partnership with the CPL office at your college, because I think that they have access to to resources and tools that would hopefully make it an easier undertaking at the department level. And I think that it would be a way of sort of helping make sure that when particular equivalencies or I guess when pathways are established, that the availability of those pathways is implemented equitably, because they would have ways of sort of making sure that it's reflected in the data and that it is students know how to find out about it. So I would not do it in a vacuum. I would, but I definitely would encourage departments that are interested to explore ways of creating their own models for sure. Okay, let me see. And then what is the maximum number of credits CUNY accepts for CPL? So the only limitation that, and I guess we're probably done with the poll here. I'll share the results. The maximum, so the only limit on the number of credits for CPL based on CUNY's university-wide policy is that they cannot count toward residency requirements. So it can't go above that threshold. Some colleges may create their own policies that put some other limitations in place, but from a university perspective, we do not limit the number. So I hope that's helpful. That was, I think, sent to me as a direct message. So I think I've hit most of the other questions. Can I invite anybody to come off mute if anybody's interested in jumping in with a question? So I'm not just the only one talking. Thank you all for listening throughout. Oh, here we have another question in the chat, but if any hands go up, Ted, flag it for me. Presently at CUNY, what do you think the division is between CPL offered for exams and tests versus, yeah, that's a great question. So I think, so we have, based on our data, I think we know that exams, particularly AP exams, which, as everybody is pretty aware, are awarded generally to incoming students from the high school pipeline, but also other exams, that those by far are the most common form of CPL across most colleges. And so it's interesting because when we're looking at our data and we're thinking about areas that we really want to demonstrate growth, we're actually trying to sort of exclude exams from that, not because exams aren't important. They are super important, and I have much more to say about that, but I won't go into too much detail right now. But we really want to try and understand and encourage growth in the other spaces, especially in looking at industry-connected certifications and ways that people who are in the workforce who have really substantive knowledge would have pathways into CUNY that would recognize that. And in a lot of cases, those are very, they're very like sector specific. So I think we want to think about that. I see a hand up here. Go ahead, Daniel. Thank you for all your questions throughout.
Yes, I'm sorry if I've asked too many. It's super interesting,
no.
and I appreciate the overview. I was just thinking about this issue of, even the model that says, how did your work at your family's store for 10 years, how does that show up as a course that's in our catalog that we can give you credit for? That seems like such a restrictive model, because the skills and the learning, so much of like our NACE teaching is students are developing all sorts of important skills in classes that aren't just, in my class about US history, they're developing communication skills and collaborative skills. I don't know, I just wish there was a way to acknowledge the growth and development that's happening working in that store for 10 years, even if it doesn't look like History 151 or Business 101.
Absolutely. And I think that, that is one of the reasons why the engagement of faculty and advisors and other people who really have that face-to-face ongoing contact with students is so important to shaping the strategy and the types of CPL at the campus, because I think that that perspective on sort of the like just the different shapes and the expansiveness that learning can take. Portfolio assessment can be a great vehicle for that if it can be done in a way that can kind of, capture the learning that applies to this discipline and the learning that applies to that discipline and the way that it applies to gen ed requirements. And, but I think that that at a college level, it's really important to think about how to even capture that students are coming in with that learning so that you can talk to the various departments that touch those areas about their interest and willingness to consider credit, and for advising conversations to be, not just limited to like, okay, on a piece of paper, here are the things that you may be eligible for, but for people to learn to really like listen and read between the lines on what students are telling them and try to identify ways that that it could articulate to particular courses or the competencies of particular degree programs. I think there's a lot of work to be done there across CUNY to try and capture that. So so thank you for raising those questions, and would love to like engage more deeply on thinking through some of how to bring some of that NACE thinking into the conversation. Okay, where are we? We have like 2 more minutes. Okay. Oh yeah, there's some great comments here. Can someone receive the majority of their credits in their major without taking classes? I think that I think majority, that's where that the residency requirement comes into play, that at a particular college, what the residency requirement is going to be the limit on what CPL can accomplish. I would love to dig into that a little more, but in the interest of time, I do want to just turn to the information on my last slide here. Make sure that if you haven't already taken a look at the other offerings that we have in our professional development series this year, please do. We'd love to have as much participation as possible. We're going to cover some really interesting and important topics. I also want to let you know that we are getting really close to launching a new online self-paced CPL professional development course in Brightspace, which I think is going to be just a great resource for going a little bit deeper on everything we covered here. And I would, you'll definitely be hearing from me when that is live and available. And I really hope that you will take advantage of it and that you will also point your colleagues towards it as well. And I hope that you will encourage any colleagues who weren't able to make it today or who you think would benefit from the information shared here to check out our recording and to make sure that, we're just reaching as many different stakeholders across CUNY as possible. This is work that really takes a village. It really requires the participation and thoughtful engagement of many different minds at CUNY. So thank you all so much for joining today, and I hope to see you at more of our sessions in the future.